The three central defenders, you've got Martin Hayden, you've got Rob Molyneux, and you've got Michael Dubry, who are injured. So really you've got Lucas Radebe and Jonathan Woodgate.
He played through the 1960s and 1970s with Leeds United, winning league titles, collecting caps for England, and building a reputation so fierce it earned him a nickname that followed him for the rest of his life: Bites Your Legs. But if you only knew Hunter through that nickname, you only knew half the story. Behind the image of the relentless, tackle-first destroyer was a player of genuine technical quality, a man his teammates consistently described as one of the kindest people in football, and a career shaped by controversies he never fully escaped. And then, at the age of 76, during the early months of a global pandemic, Norman Hunter left the world. This is what happened. I am Oliver, and this is Sport Icons. The nickname started as a terrace chant, the kind of shorthand that football crowds generate for players who make an impression in a very specific way. Hunter made his impression through tackling. He went into challenges with a commitment that bordered on the absolute, arriving at the ball before strikers had time to consider whether bracing themselves was a useful response. By the time they'd decided it was already too late. During the 1960s and 1970s, when English football operated in a considerably more physical register than it does now, Hunter was still considered one of the harder men on the pitch. The thing about Bites Your Legs, though, is that it was simultaneously accurate and misleading. It captured one dimension of Hunter perfectly, but it buried everything else underneath it. His teammates at Leeds were consistently clear on this point. Norman Hunter could play. He read the game intelligently, he distributed the ball well, and his positioning, long before positioning became a fashionable talking point in football analysis, was something coaches pointed to as genuinely elite. The nickname made him sound like a blunt instrument. He wasn't. He was a highly skilled defender, who also happened to be someone you really, genuinely did not want to run at. The reputation shaped how the wider public understood him for decades. You mention Norman Hunter to someone who watched football in the 1970s, and the first thing they reach for is the nickname, the image of the crunching tackle, the opponent who didn't get back up quickly. That picture isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. Hunter was more than the label, and the people who shared a dressing room with him always knew it, even if the rest of the country took longer to catch up. There's a particular kind of frustration that comes with being genuinely excellent at something and finding that excellence consistently measured against someone who operates at an almost untouchably different level of public regard. Norman Hunter understood that frustration better than most. He was one of England's finest defenders across his career. He was also unfortunate enough to play in the same position at the same time as Bobby Moore. Moore captained England to the 1966 World Cup, became one of the most celebrated footballers the country had ever produced, and occupied a place in the national consciousness that went beyond football entirely. He was an icon in the fullest sense, and Hunter, competing for the same spot in the same squad during the same period, was always going to be the one who waited. Hunter was part of England's 1966 World Cup squad. He went to the tournament. He was there, part of the setup, part of the group that won the thing. But he didn't play a single minute of the tournament itself. Moore played every game, Hunter watched, and that pattern, Moore playing while Hunter waited, repeated itself across much of his international career, limiting him to just 28 caps. For a defender of his quality, playing for England during a genuinely competitive era for the national team, 28 caps tells you everything about the nature of that particular shadow. It didn't diminish what Hunter did at club level. Leeds United, under Don Revie, were one of the most formidable club sides in English football during this period, and Hunter was central to that. But international football carries its own weight, its own measure of recognition, and Hunter's record there has a gap in it that speaks directly to the misfortune of his timing. Make sure to like and subscribe. And now back to the video. If the Moore situation was frustrating, what happened to Norman Hunter in European football went beyond frustration into something that stayed with the Leeds squad for the rest of their lives. Hunter played in 2 European finals with Leeds United. He didn't win either of them, and the circumstances surrounding both losses were controversial enough that several members of that team went to their graves convinced they had been cheated. The first was the 1973 Cup Winners' Cup final, played in Salonika. Leeds faced AC Milan, and the performance of the Greek referee that night was so widely criticised that it became one of the most debated officiating decisions in European club football. Leeds players and supporters were convinced they'd been denied legitimate goals and that decisions had gone against them in ways that had nothing to do with football. They lost 1-0. 2 years later, in Paris, Leeds reached the European Cup final. They faced Bayern Munich, and again, the refereeing decisions drew fierce criticism. Again, Leeds lost. Again, Hunter and his teammates walked away from a European final, believing the night had been taken from them by decisions they couldn't control. What makes all of this more pointed is what emerged later. Christos Michas, a referee who officiated in European football during that era, was eventually banned for life for match fixing in unrelated cases. That detail has fed the conversation around Leeds' European final defeats ever since, though it's worth being clear, there has never been any proof that either the 1973 or 1975 final was fixed. The connection people draw is circumstantial, but the fact that it exists at all, that the question can even be asked, tells you something about how those nights felt to the men who played in them. Hunter was a player who gave everything in those matches. He competed in 2 of the biggest club games European football offered, and came away with nothing. For a man of his quality, representing one of England's best club sides during one of their most competitive periods, that absence of a European winners' medal was a wound that never quite closed. In 1974, Norman Hunter became the first ever winner of the PFA Players' Player of the Year award. Think about what that means. The inaugural recipient, the first name ever inscribed on what became one of English football's most respected individual honours, was Norman Hunter. His fellow professionals, the players who faced him week after week and understood better than anyone what he could do, chose him as the best player in the country that year. That's an extraordinary thing, and it's an extraordinary thing that most people, even those with a reasonable knowledge of English football history, wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of their head. The bites your legs image was so dominant, so embedded, that the fuller picture of Hunter's quality got consistently pushed aside. He was the first winner of a prize that players like Kevin Keegan, Kenny Dalglish, and Thierry Henry would later receive. He stood at the beginning of that list. The award came from the people best placed to judge him, not journalists, not supporters, not television pundits, players. The professionals who'd spent 90 minutes trying to get past him, or who'd watched their teammates attempt it, voted him the best. In 1974. In the year he first received that vote, the PFA hadn't even worked out what to call the thing yet. Hunter helped define what the award meant before it had properly established itself. In 2009, a film came out called The Damned United. It told the story of Brian Clough's 44-day tenure as Leeds United manager, and it did so in a way that portrayed the Leeds squad of that era in a distinctly unflattering light. The film depicted them as dirty, as difficult, as a group defined more by cynicism and physical aggression than by quality or character. Norman Hunter did not take this quietly. Hunter was among the former Leeds players who publicly pushed back against the film's portrayal of the club. He believed it was historically unfair, that it reduced men of genuine ability to caricatures, and that it recycled the worst of the dirty Leeds narrative without any serious attempt to represent what that squad actually were. His teammates from that era, many of them still alive when the film was released, said the same thing. Brian Clough's story was fair game. The use of their reputations to tell it, they felt, was not. It's worth taking that seriously. These were players who had spent their careers fighting against a public image that consistently undervalued their football and overemphasized their physicality. The nickname had followed Hunter for decades. The European final losses had never been properly acknowledged as the injustices many believed them to be. And then, in retirement, a commercially successful film arrived to reinforce exactly the version of events they'd spent years pushing back against. Hunter wasn't trying to rewrite history. He was trying to add the parts that had been left out, the human beings behind the tackles, the footballers behind the reputation, the man behind the nickname. He felt the film didn't do that, and he said so, with the directness you'd expect from someone who'd spent 30 years as one of English football's most straightforward presences. After he retired from playing, Hunter moved into management. He took charge of Barnsley in 1980 and spent several years there, building a reasonable record and earning respect for the way he conducted himself in a considerably less glamorous environment than the one he'd inhabited as a player. He later managed Rotherham United, again competently, again without the kind of success that generates headlines. It's honest to say that Hunter's managerial career never came close to matching what he'd achieved as a player. That's not an uncommon story. The skills that make someone an elite defender, the physical instincts, the positional awareness, the competitive drive, don't automatically transfer into the skills required to manage men, shape tactics from a dugout, and navigate the specific pressures of football management. Some players make that transition brilliantly, others find it doesn't suit them, or that the right opportunities don't arrive, or that the clubs available to them aren't platforms that match their ambitions. Hunter was honest about this side of his career. He'd been at the top of English football as a player, part of a Leeds side that genuinely competed with the best in Europe. Managing Barnsley and Rotherham was a different world. He did it well enough, with the professionalism you'd expect from a man who took his work seriously. But the managerial chapter of his story is a footnote next to the playing chapter. He stayed connected to the game he loved, even if the game no longer needed him in the way it once had. In 2013, Norman Hunter was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. He didn't announce it. He didn't make it the focus of interviews or public appearances. He kept it largely to himself, in the way that men of his generation often kept these things, and he continued showing up for Leeds United the way he always had. That's the detail that matters here. Hunter remained a regular presence at Elland Road long after retirement. He attended matches, he appeared at events, he remained connected to the club that had defined his career and to the supporters who had watched him play. The diagnosis didn't change that. He continued turning up, continuing to be Norman Hunter, in the way that said more about his character than any interview about his illness would have. The supporters who saw him at Elland Road during those years didn't always know what he was carrying. That was the point. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He wasn't making the illness part of his public identity. He was doing what he'd always done. Showing up, being present, giving his time to the club and the people who mattered to him. His teammates from the Leeds years had spent decades describing him as one of the kindest and most humble people in football, a man whose private character was completely at odds with the on-pitch image the nickname had created. The way he handled his diagnosis was consistent with everything they'd said about him. By April 2020, the world had changed in ways nobody had fully processed. COVID-19 had moved through Europe with a speed that overwhelmed healthcare systems and left governments and populations scrambling for responses that felt adequate to something none of them had faced before. In England, the pandemic was at its most dangerous and least understood, and Norman Hunter, 76 years old, already carrying the leukemia diagnosis he'd managed quietly for 7 years, tested positive for the virus. He was admitted to hospital. For a period, there was the kind of cautious hope that accompanies these situations, the updates from the club, public messages of support from across the football world, the sense that a man of Hunter's character might find a way through. He didn't. On the 17th of April 2020, Norman Hunter died. He was one of the most prominent football figures to lose his life during the early months of the pandemic, and the tributes that arrived from across the game reflected exactly that. Leeds United renamed the South Stand at Elland Road in his honour. It's called the Norman Hunter Stand now. For a man who gave so much of his life to that club, who turned up at that ground long after he had any obligation to, who remained part of the fabric of Leeds United, through title wins and relegations and everything in between, it's the right kind of permanent acknowledgement. The stand that bears his name is used every match day by supporters who know his story, and by some who are still learning it. Norman Hunter's career was built on a reputation that was always bigger and simpler than the man himself. Bites your legs captured the tackle but missed the player. 28 England caps captured the number but missed the context. Bobby Moore standing in front of the queue for the better part of a decade, through no fault of either man. The 2 European finals captured the occasions but missed the bitterness. 2 nights in Salonika and Paris where Leeds played, lost, and left convinced that something had been taken from them. The film captured a version of the story, missed the humanity of the people inside it, which is why Hunter and his former teammates were right to push back. The first ever PFA Players Player of the Year award tells you what his peers thought of him, stripped of the nickname and the noise. Kind, humble, always present at Elland Road long after the last ball had been kicked, carrying a leukemia diagnosis in private while continuing to show up for the club that shaped him. Gone in April 2020 at 76, during a pandemic that stole too many people too quickly. Hunter gave everything to the game. Game gave him a great deal back. Career of genuine achievement. Place in the history of English football that no nickname can reduce. What it didn't give him was the full recognition he deserved during his playing years, the European medals that 2 controversial finals denied him, or enough time. Send some prayers for Norman Hunter in the comments below, and if his story meant something to you, hit the like button and subscribe for more.